Good morning and welcome to the United Way of Johnson and Washington County's 2022 CEO Breakfast. My name is Jackie Townsend and I'm the Director of Operations for Procter & Gamble at our Power Toothbrush facility here in Iowa City. And I also serve as the Board Chair for the United Way of Johnson and Washington Counties. I'm so pleased to see so many of the wonderful leaders in our community taking the time to come spend your morning with us. I know all of you have busy schedules and it's a commitment that we appreciate seeing to the United Way, so thank you for doing that. And I also want to give a special thanks to Linda Basher. I know Tricia mentioned it, but what a beautiful venue to spend a nice almost fall morning in Iowa City. Take a look, and then also to the Bread Garden Market for their donation for coffee and breakfast this morning. I want to encourage all of you to use your mobile device. You have a QR code on your agenda, and that will take you through our virtual program so you can follow along there as well. And without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce to you our interim president and CEO, Miss Mary Westbrook.
Thank you. It's deja vu being back. But thank you very much, Jackie. Those of you who know me know how glad I am to be up at dark 30. Regardless, I am delighted to be here. Serving as the interim president and CEO of the United Way gives me much pleasure, and I'm actually having a lot of fun doing it. It's good to be here at the CEO breakfast. It's nice to see all of you here. But I must mention that I miss seeing Charlie Funk, especially in his own building. As you know, he had a terrible accident and is likely on a very long road of rehabilitation. I'm sure he knows that we are all with him and are happy at the same time to be able to have Len DeBasher here, both in his place, in Charlie's place, and also in his role working with us at the United Way. So thank you, Len. Regardless of the pandemic, we've had a very good year. It's discussed in our annual report, which you can easily find on our website. It's interesting reading and it's beautifully done, led by our own Trish Smith, with fabulous design support from Robin Hepker of Benson and Hepker Design. I loved reading the stories about our Christmas support of families, about the summer ships we give to help kids go to camp, about our volunteer support across the community, and so many more things. And we can do those things because of you. Thank you so very much for your leadership in giving, for your support of our United Way campaign for our community, and for all you do to help the most vulnerable amongst us in both Johnson and Washington counties. With your support, our volunteers and staff can make a lot happen. Now you just get me and Trish and Carol today. We don't have Patty here today, who's our Vice President for Impact and Engagement. And she does so much delivery that she makes it look easy. Carol, who is here, absolutely knows where every pledge is at every moment and can seemingly produce a report in the blink of an eye. And our CFO, Terry Anderson, who's normally here, is missing because she isn't feeling well. But I want you to know she never misses much, and she keeps us all on the straight and narrow. And last of all, I want to introduce Trish Smith, who is our VP of Development and Marketing. She is the one who puts together a meeting like this, pulls in all the right people, and while she's walking out the door, is working on the next event. It's a marvel to behold. Thank you, Trish, and to all the staff I have the privilege to work with, and thank you all for being here. Trish, you're up next.
Why, thank you, Mary. But we also want to do a special shout out to Mary. She stepped in as our interim president and CEO and has done a phenomenal job with our team, leading us and continuing to move our community forward through United Way, and we're very appreciative of her commitment to our organization. With that, I have the pleasure of introducing our featured speaker today. Amy Christoph Brown was named the Dean of Tippie College of Business in 2020. She joined Tippie College after receiving her PhD in Organizational Behavior and Human Resource Management from the University of Maryland in 1997. Since that time, she has been awarded a winning professor in the college's Department of Management and Entrepreneurship. In her tenure at Tippy, she has served as the director of the department's doctoral program, as department executive officer, and senior associate dean of the college, and later as interim dean until being named dean again in the late 2020. Her research interests focus on compatibility or fit between individuals and their work environments. She is the co-editor of the book Organizational Fit, Key Issues and New Directions, and has published over 20 articles in academic journals, as well as several book chapters. She is also a mentor. She has served as 30 doctoral and master's thesis committees. Professionally, she has served as an associate editor of the Journal of Applied Psychology and the Journal of Business and Psychology. She is a fellow of the Society for Industrial and Organizational Psychology and the American Psychological Association. She presents regularly to companies and student groups on topics including finding a good fit during a job search, the millennial and Gen Z workforce, managing change, and negotiating for what you need. Personally, Amy and her husband, Ken Brown, live in Iowa City and are the parents of 2 college-age daughters. We welcome Amy Christoph Brown to our podium for our featured presentation.
We could have gone with a lot shorter introduction there. But, I don't know what they send all the time, so if you can go ahead and take me forward. I know many of you from seeing you around town, from working with you with a variety of different organizations. So I apologize for those of you who have seen enough of me already this year. I'm here today for the new people. Let's go with that. One of the things that I got to do in my career teaching at the University of Iowa was I taught on managing people and also managing change, organizational design and structure, and leadership. So those are kind of the topic areas. I typically instruct MBA students and executives. I haven't worked with undergraduate students in a while. And so a lot of this is geared toward people who are in kind of leadership level positions. And one of the topics that people are always interested in learning more about is how do we manage change? You know, everybody says, this is what we need to do, this is what you need to do in the position, and it's just really hard. We haven't figured it out. So I'm gonna take you through just very briefly a couple of quick, what I think are the sort of gems from a 16-week class on managing change. So you get that in the next 16 minutes. All right, introducing change. First of all, I like to start with this slide because it is a formidable venture. I like those words because I think it describes what your people are going through, but also what you are going through as a leader of that change, the people who are at the cutting edge. I talk typically in organizations, and we talk about 3 different groups of people. The change strategists, who are responsible for identifying the need for change and really sort of getting the ball rolling. The change implementers, which are very typically middle managers or sort of next level down. They're the ones who are connected to frontline employees, to their customers, but they're also very much in charge of leading the change in their organization. And then the change recipients, who are also responsible, and they're responsible for accepting and really adapting to the change that is being given to them. They don't tend to have a lot of voice in what's being done, but they are responsible for executing it. So of these 3 groups, which do you think is the hardest one? Recipients is hard. I'm going to push you a little more. Strategists. Strategists is hard because you're thinking big thoughts. The really hard one, the implementers. The reason why, now all of them are difficult. The reason why the implementers is hard is because they have to be able to do both things. They have to be able to adapt to the change that's given to them by the strategists, right? They don't often get a voice in it, but they have to accept it. So in some ways they're a recipient, but they also have to be the one that then conveys the rationale for the change to the other people in the organization. Even if they don't believe in it, even if they have no idea where it came from, even if they're like, this is never gonna work, but they can't go to their employees and say, here's the change, this is never gonna work, but let's pretend to do it. Now, I have met managers that do that. There are plenty of them that do it, not the good ones. So, to be a really good change implementer, that's the really tricky position because you are simultaneously having to play both of those roles. So I want to talk about that tension a little bit today. Starting out at the top, we'll sort of hit the highlights for each of the three groups. From the strategist view, there are 1,000 books out there that will talk to you about different steps toward managing a planned change, right? The ones that I put up here, this one over here is a model by Kurt Lewin, one of the most famous social psychologists of all times. Very, very basic. He was here actually at the University of Iowa for a couple of years after World War II, before he kind of went off to work with the US government. His model of unfreezing movement and refreezing has been reused in multiple ways. And you see one of the most popular examples, John Cotter's model. He's at Harvard. His books, probably the most well-circulated books about change. He has this model that has 8 steps. If you look at them, the top 4 really fit in unfreezing, 5 and 6 really fit into movement, 7 and 8 really fit into refreezing. You can go out and look anywhere. You can find the 10 commandments of managing change, the 10-step process to managing change, the 7 habits of managing change to be effective. There's 1,000 different models with different numbers of steps. Almost all of them will always fit into this model that Lewin created sort of back in the 1940s. You've got to get people unstuck from where they are. You have to convince them that there's a reason that we should be doing something different, because they've managed to adapt to the way we're already doing things, even if they're suboptimal. And so the idea that you have to then convince them that something else would be better, that's the unfreezing step. The movement, there's just kind of chaos that happens, and there's all kinds of planning, and there's process managers, and there's KPIs, and there's all of these other things that you're trying to do to kind of move people forward. But something happens, the group moves forward, and then if you don't take the process of refreezing, which is where you start to institutionalize the new way that things are going to be done, they will very easily slip back into the way things used to be done. The refreezing step, we talk about it, baking in, institutionalizing the change. It's basically changing the way you measure and reward and hire. Who are the new people that you're bringing in? Are they on board with this change? How do you reward them? What do you measure for them? So very, very basic models. One of the things that I don't like about any of these models is it kind of ignores the pre-step, which is how do you come up with the idea of how you're going to change in the first place. And I will tell you, there is very little in the change literature that ever talks about that. It's like they assume that this idea comes down from the heavens and is given to you, and it is the correct one, and you are 100% confident about it, and you move forward with it. Sometimes that gets covered in the strategy literature, like how do you pick what the change is going to be, but very, very rarely is it ever covered in the actual change literature. So any of these models will work. Think about it always. Have we gone through these basic 3 steps? Have we unfrozen, moved, and refrozen? One of the hardest things is the unfreezing stage, particularly if you are not in a desperate circumstance. So I took over as the interim dean in the Tippie College on March 1st of 2020. There was no need to try to unfreeze people. Like, there was a lot of unfreezing going on. Everybody knew why we had to do things differently. You didn't have to spend a lot of time convincing people why there was a need to do something different. It was just there. Now, if I'm trying to initiate a change, it's a little bit harder because everybody's like, okay, we're back, it's all good, things are stable, things are as they should be, and it's a little harder now to get people convinced that we need to do something new and different. So the unfreezing is really critical. From the implementer's perspective, one of the key things that I always tell middle managers when I'm working with them is once you have this change and you're trying to implement it, we have this view that you're going to talk about it, you're going to educate people about it, and then there's going to be this curve that sort of shoots dramatically upward because everyone will see the logic and the benefits of moving to this plan, and everyone will get on board, and then we'll be able to execute and we'll move forward. And in reality, it's much more like what we would show as a new product adoption curve. in a marketing class. There are always people who are going to accept this change at a slower rate. That's not unusual, and if you expect it, it actually makes the implementation a lot easier. So if you think about your folks who are in these different roles, you've got your innovators, they're your beta testers. They're the people who they'll change just because it's fun and exciting, and they don't even care if it doesn't work. So they're gonna try things out for you, they're super enthusiastic. They are not representative of the rest of your people. Assuming that they are and that everyone will be as enthusiastic as they are is a bad assumption, and it's gonna set you up to be frustrated. So you've got your innovators, they're willing to try things when they're messy, and they're really important people to identify. They don't always rush in with eyes open, they sometimes just rush in to do something new. And so you'll learn stuff from them, but they're not representative of the rest of your curve. Your early adopters are the ones that you're gonna have to really sort of bring on board as your leading coalition. They're your people who are going to create your small wins at the beginning from Cotter's model so that people see, yeah, there's some benefits to this and it might actually work. So they're your folks that you're really bringing in, opinion leaders, people who are in influential positions and can actually make things happen in the organization. So they're a really important group. Your early and late majority, these are the people that are kind of waiting to see. Early adopters tend to hop in a little bit earlier. They're the ones that are, they see that there's benefits, they kind of look for what's in it for me, and if there's something good, then we'll probably go ahead and try it. Whether it's because we want to get promoted, whether it's because we thought the old way really was terrible and we're ready to get on board, but they're ready to jump in. The late adopters are going to absolutely have to be shown that the change is going to work and that it's better. So there's a large group of people that are going to say, no, I'm not with you until you can show me 100% that this is going to work and that it's going to be beneficial. They are also the ones that tend to wait until it becomes easier for them to do the new thing than the old thing. And your laggards are the group of people who are going to get on board only after it is impossible for them to do things in the old way. So these are the people that you have to shut the old system down before they will use it. This was me with submitting paper copies of my dependent care and healthcare spending forms at the University of Iowa. I didn't want to have to scan them in. I didn't want to do the electronic process. I just put a big old staple in them and shipped them off. And it wasn't until we got to the point where they said, we're no longer accepting paper copies. Then finally, I adapted and I said, okay, I'm willing to scan in my health receipts. So sometimes you have to kind of take away the old system for people to get on board. And then you've got resistors, who are the people that no matter what, they are never going to make it work. These are the people who are even willing to do sort of self-damage just to be resistant to the system. So these are the ones in my example who would say, well, I'm just not going to use that healthcare spending account anymore because it's too difficult for me to make this change. So they would, in effect, shortchange themselves from participating in an opportunity because they're so resistant to the change. So how do you know when you have somebody who's a skeptic or a laggard and somebody who's a resistor, and what do you do differently between them? A skeptic is somebody who really needs to be shown this is going to work and this is going to be better for me. They tend to ask a lot of questions. They say things like, well, when we tried this before, it didn't work, and so why are we thinking that it's going to work this time? They bring up lots of examples. The key thing about skeptics is that they are willing to listen. So you can sit down and have a dialogue with them and you can explain, here's how this change is different than what we did last time. Here's why we're in an environment where this is going to be effective for our organization. And they're gonna ask lots of questions and they're gonna make you just go crazy and think, oh my gosh, that person's not asking for another meeting again to talk about this, but they're willing to have the conversation. If you can win them over, they are tremendously powerful in pulling along that group of people that are those late adopters, because they're gonna be the ones that are very often opinion leaders and people will listen to them because they're already talking about what their concerns are with the change. So you want them now talking about what are the reasons why we might wanna make this happen. Ways to work with them, using logic and emotion for persuasion. Very often we only fall back on logic, and there are there are lots of ways to dispute people's logic. So you want to sort of pair your logic with your emotion. It goes back to very fundamentals of influence and persuasion. When you can bring a compelling story and put it on top of your logical argument, that's much more powerful than just using the logical argument. And just don't ever say the data speaks for itself, because the data never speaks for itself. It tells people exactly what they want to hear. Data is amazing that way. That's why we teach our students not only to use data to solve problems, but to then communicate the solution that the data is telling you. Starting with one-on-one communication is pretty critical. Working with these people, you are not going to ever win them over in a large setting. Starting with a town hall to talk about all the concerns that this person has with the particular change that you're implementing, not going to work. One-on-one conversations, then you move your way into the more public settings. Soliciting their involvement is tremendously powerful, getting them on some of the committees. They are the person you don't want on the committee because you think, yeah, they're going to slow us down, they're going to make it so difficult. But what they'll do is they'll help point out the flaws and the weaknesses in your initial approach. And so it is typically worth having them involved in the process, because they can help you anticipate what are the real challenges that are going to come up and how do we avoid them. Providing socio-emotional support is also really important here. The change implementer process is one where you're spending a lot of time also dealing with the emotionality of the change recipients. And so these individuals are dealing with a loss, and we'll talk about this in a minute. So part of what you're doing is you're helping them through this process. And it's not just logically persuading them it's a good idea or showing compelling examples. It's helping them navigate the stress and anxiety that results from being someone who has to receive the change and make it happen. The resistors, these are the ones that you're never going to convince. So logic, compelling stories, none of this is going to work. I've got one of those I'm working with right now. We're trying to figure out how do we get this person to get on board, and it's probably going to result in a negotiation or an exchange. So I'm not going to convince you, but I may be able to give you something that you want in order to get your buy-in to this conversation. You have to decide whether that's worth it or not, because as soon as you've given something, you set up the expectation that any time I want you to do something, I'm going to give you something in return. It's a very transactional approach. Sometimes it is what you have to do. I'll just mention no, I won't even mention that. I was going to say something about tenure-track faculty. But following through on consequences, really, really important. If you say that something's going to happen if they don't participate in the change, you have to follow through on the consequences, or else you've lost all legitimacy with them and with everyone that they speak to, which will be everyone. You know, what you can do here, if you have the option, is, you know, you can set up an ultimatum. You can say, you know, if this is the way we're moving, if you can't do this, then I think we should talk about other alternatives for you. Sometimes we don't have that option because the person has a contract that you can't break. So maybe they have a set of skills that you absolutely need in the organization at the time, and you can't afford to let them go. So you just want to be really careful about ultimatums, because you've got to follow through on the consequences if you have set that ultimatum. I put this in italics because I'm just kind of thinking about this recently. We kind of write off the resistors, right? We accept the skeptics, we can use them, we can learn from them. The resistors we write off. And I do wonder, just from the psychological background, what is it that creates that? Like, is there something you can do in terms of support that really gets to the root of why are you so resistant to this? And I don't think asking them that question is going to get to the root of it, but I do think there are some benefits. Usually when people resist something, it's because they're afraid. And finding out what they're afraid of would be a really interesting way to work with them. But at a certain point, you just know that there's not much more we can do here, and you've got to set up your consequences. From the recipient's view, I think one of the most useful pieces that I often teach about is this model that's called, it's Managing Change, and of course I'm blanking on the guy's name at the moment who has this book, Managing Transitions by William Bridges, that's what it is. And he talks about this idea that when you're a recipient of change, and that's whether you're a recipient at the lowest possible end point of the change, or maybe you're an implementer, so you're receiving it first from your supervisor and then you have to implement it, is understanding that every change comes with a loss of something else. And not acknowledging that loss and just being super excited about the new thing that's happening is not going to help people manage the emotional side of what that transition involves. So it's a really interesting sort of flipping change on its side and not focusing on the change itself, but on the transition process that people emotionally go through as they're being asked to embrace a change. So starting with something ending, you start with denial. A lot of this is sort of similar to stages of grief. You start with denial, shock, anger. Usually we move very quickly into anger. Frustration, stress, depression, people pull out, they get very ambivalent. I don't even care anymore what this organization does. I'm just here to get my paycheck. They really withdraw and pull out. And a lot of that is coming from going through these very predictable stages of coping with loss. I had an employee one time, we were doing a restructuring, and I thought I was being super helpful to her because in this new structure, her position could go sort of one of two ways. And I was letting her choose. I said, you map what the new position's gonna be. Like, you decide how you wanna be involved in this organization kind of moving forward. And what I realized after the third time that she was in my office in tears, after 2 or 3 months, is that she was stuck here. And she couldn't move forward because there was no definition of kind of where we were going. And so I finally just said, would it be helpful if I picked for you and made a recommendation of where I think you would be most helpful? And she said, that would be such a relief because I don't know where I want to choose these different ways. So we set something in place. We said, try this. If it doesn't work, we can go back and we can revisit it later. But giving her the ability to kind of move forward into accepting sort of what this new role was going to be for her was really important in helping her move through the process. So acknowledging sort of what people are going through, giving some clarity, honoring the past. We often talk about sort of acknowledging when somebody's getting ready to transition out of a role, acknowledging all the things that they did in that role, the benefits of them as a person, right before someone retires. Think about doing that for systems that are in your organization as well. Because people liked those systems. Some of them created those systems. Some of them invested their entire careers in those systems. And if all you're saying is, that old system sucked, this new one is going to be so much better, then you're disparaging a lot of the things that they put their energy, their effort, their soul into. And helping them walk through that and honor the old system and why it worked and why it was valuable when you had it, but then moving people into here's why it's not going to work moving forward and here's what we're doing instead, allows you to help move them through that neutral zone. If you let people stagnate kind of down here, what you're going to get is just a lot of that disengagement and ambivalence. You'll get some people actively resisting, but you'll really end up with people just not getting on board, not being enthusiastic, not bringing their whole selves to work. So thinking about that process as something that you're managing, I think can be very powerful. Okay. All right, one of my last quotes. It's not an easy process. It's painful for the people receiving, but also the people who are trying to implement the changes. So I'll just kind of finish up talking about resiliency and why it's so important for change leaders. We've all been in these positions recently, and we know that as the implementer, even if we're the strategist, we're also the implementer. We are going through changes ourselves. We are going through all of the anxiety and frustration and concern about, is this going to work? What do I have to do to make it happen? So making sure that you're doing the things to help yourself be resilient is really critical for being successful as a change leader, because you have to be there for people. You can't go into work and say, well, I'm really kind of freaking out about this change. It may not even work. I mean, I don't know. That is not the way to really set the path forward, right? You've got to go in, and you can be vulnerable, absolutely, and say, we all have our questions, and this is stressful for all of us, but you cannot indicate, I don't really know if this is going to work or not, but let's just try it. So being able to kind of think about that, and these are some keys to resiliency. Seeing challenges as just, this is reality. It's necessary, it's interesting, it's messy, and it also is an opportunity to learn and develop. That's one of the key pivot points with resilience, is to say, this challenge is hard, it's really difficult, but we're going to learn something from this. Even if it doesn't go well, we're going to learn something from that and move forward. Having what we used to call in the old days an internal locus of control, where you believe that you have the ability to influence what's going to happen next, is also a critical piece of resiliency. Feeling like the whole world is just acting on you and you have no ability to influence what happens next, that can be really, really difficult and lead to depression and anxiety. So thinking about, you may not be able to control everything, but what are the pieces that you can control? Particularly difficult when people are already burned out and suffering from compassion fatigue. Let's go to our next slide. So I'm going to give a suggestion. This is from an old article that I use all the time because I think it's got some key principles. And the idea here is oscillation. We know about this from physical training, athletic training. You cannot just work harder and harder and harder every day and expect to build strength. So my personal example, last fall I decided to run a half marathon. No idea. I think I was suffering from empty nest syndrome. I had nothing to do in the evenings. I could spend a lot of time with Ken or working, or I could go and start training for a half marathon. So I love spending time with Ken, but I wasn't sure I wanted to do it like every single evening. So I started training for this half marathon, and I figured, I can probably do this better than most of those online training programs. So I set out my path, and 3 weeks later I was injured because what I did was, well, if I run this much one night, then I'll run a little bit more the next night, and a little bit more the next night, and a little bit more. And that is not the way to train. Anybody who's ever done this or something like it, you have to go up and then you go back down, and then you go up a little further and then you go back down, and you go up again a little further and then back down. You can't just keep going up. And often what we ask ourselves to do is to just keep going up as we're dealing with stress. Just take more and more and more. And then we'll hold out for that big vacation at the end. It doesn't work that way. So you've got to be able, you can push yourself further every day, but allowing yourself that time to kind of that recovery period in a way that's kind of oscillating can be really critical. And it makes a difference. After I actually switched to working with a PT and using a validated training program that involved oscillating between sort of stretch and recovery, I went through the rest of the training with no injuries whatsoever. So really made a big difference. Different kinds of capacity, I think these are important to point out. Your physical capacity, emotional, mental, and spiritual capacity. We often only think about one or two of those things, but all of these pieces are kind of our holistic self. And when we let two of them drop because we're focusing on the other two, we're working in kind of a deficit mode. So thinking about what are you doing that feeds each of these different pieces in a way that helps you build resilience. And my last slide is we just talked about this last week at our Faculty Senate retreat, dealing with compassion fatigue, because often as leaders you are in that role of providing that socio-emotional support to others, and you probably do it very well, but it is also depleting for you as a resource. And so in order to continue doing it, we know about this from the medical profession, you need to be able to then give back to yourself. And these are just some very quick and easy things I just pulled off of the web of ways that you can help your own fatigue as you're managing the process. The more that you can take care of yourself, the better you are able to then be there for the people that you're leading. And that makes a difference in terms of their being able to accept and move through the change. it makes a difference in whether they're willing to stick with you through the process or not. President Wilson's here. She's always a very positive influence, I think, in the groups that she's in. She talks a lot about forward momentum, constantly having that sort of optimistic future. Where are we going? That is tremendously impactful for the people around you because they're looking for it. And they're going to respond with resistance, and they're going to respond with skepticism and all of those things, and you just keep plowing through. But you plow through with the optimism only if you're able to then refresh and refuel yourself so that you can get up and do it again the next day. So that's what I have for today. Brief highlights. Wasn't 16 weeks worth, but gives you a general idea of some of the things that we cover with our MBA students. Thank you for inviting me in today to speak, and I'm happy to take any questions, but I think we have somebody else coming up at 8 o'clock, which I've already blown through their time. So
No, it's fine.
I'm happy to answer questions
We
afterwards.
do have just a
How
few
about that?
minutes for questions. If anybody has anything they want to ask of Amy, they certainly are welcome to do so.
First, thanks, Amy.
Why can't I answer? Damn. This is going to be an obnoxious
Oh, yeah.
question. Isn't it? Yeah, I know.
Right there.
So we've been reading a lot about this concept of quiet quitting
Yeah.
from employees.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about your view of that from just an organizational perspective?
Yep, it's if you think about kind of that transition process, these are people who they've gone through anger, they've been frustrated, now they're in that zone of kind of indifference, and they're to the point where they're withdrawing, they're disengaging from their work, they're still physically showing up, but they're not bringing their best selves to work. And so thinking about what is that piece then that you can use to move people through to get them to something that they are excited about and that they're kind of willing to go forward and to embrace. That's a key piece, but trying to figure out what's going to re-engage them when they're also saying, I'm so burned out, I can't possibly take on anything new because I'm so burned out. It's not that people have no time to do anything. It's that they're not excited about the opportunities for what they have. And so what can you think of? And that comes from knowing them. It comes from knowing what excites them, what they're passionate about. That's the kind of thing that you can then give them a project or let them step into a project where you know that they're going to be passionate about it. It's not about not having the time. It's about not having the will kind of to do it because they're just not there. They're physically there, but they're not bringing them home, their whole self. So it really comes down to knowing your people, what's going to be exciting to them. I mean, we certainly have folks who are in that domain now that we're trying to bring back into new ways of teaching that they didn't teach before, and they're not excited about it. So what do we do to help them come back in a way that they can be excited? For us, we have a lot of people teaching online in our online MBA program now. And they miss the student interaction. They have it virtually, but they miss the students sitting in their office telling them about their lives. So we're trying to re-engage those faculty by working with student groups, by doing something that really involves more one-on-one, even if it's an honor student that they're working with. That fills that hole that wasn't getting filled with the other things they're being asked to do. Yes?
First of all, thank you for your presentation.
Sure.
What about this new way of working? I was talking with a couple of people around. We have this new hybrid working model where
Yep.
people don't. How do you manage change in a hybrid, this new working model? I guess is there any best practices, that type of thing?
Yeah, it's challenging. I keep going back when we talk about hybrid working. Our faculty have always been hybrid. So I keep reassuring myself that we managed to manage them for like hundreds of years. So we're probably going to be able to do this with staff as well. Thinking about planful times that you're together. So there is plenty of work that we can do at home on our own without distraction. Actually, the data that we've collected in our management department this year suggests that people are more productive at home. There's less interruptions. They actually can get through more work, whether you think about it as kind of quiet or focused work. You know, you can get a lot done that way. What you can't do is build the relationships that you need in order to be able to understand what's going to ignite somebody's passion, right? What's going to really deeply engage them? How are you going to present compelling reasons for why something has to change? So what we're trying to do is, with all of our hybrid employees, bringing them in just as we would with faculty. Faculty have faculty meetings on a regular basis, and they get together and they talk about difficult issues. Then they go to lunch together and spend social time. So we're trying to build those things in with our staff as well. Having time when they are physically together in some space, which is hard if you have somebody completely remote, but with hybrid you do have that opportunity to bring them back in. Building in time during those days for working on difficult issues, really presenting vision types of things, really presenting the logic and also the sort of rational side with the compelling story side that works better face to face. And then giving them opportunity to spend time socially during that day, whether it's lunch together, going out after work together, whatever it might be, but allowing there to be planful interaction time when you can get to know them and they can get to know each other. It's hard. I'm not sure the 8 to 5 sitting next to each other every day was a perfect model either. So, we'll figure it out. We'll figure out ways to do it. As I said, we've done it with faculty for years. And, some of them will be more disengaged than others, but you can have a pretty powerful group of people working together in that format very effectively.
Well, thank you very much, Amy. Once
Yep.
again, thank you. Multitasking here. I just can't say enough. I got Amy's slide deck, of course, early since I event plan it, right? And so I got to dive into her slides, and it was absolutely interesting just to look at the slides and learn from the slides. But I have to say that the process of understanding that, almost a process of grieving through change. Many of you were community leaders, were organizational leaders as we went through COVID, and you demonstrated that. You put that into play, and I was just so enamored by how well that was led by many of the people in this very room throughout COVID. And I think that they're continuing to embrace that process as they move forward in their organizational changes, and I'm thankful for that as well. So thank you, Amy. Next, I have the honor of introducing our 2022-2023 campaign co-chairs, and they shortened their bios for us, so it'll be a quick intro for me, but I still have to be able to read it with my glasses. But first of all, let me introduce to you Tom Rockland. Tom is retired as Vice President for Student Life at the University of Iowa in 2017. Before serving as Vice President, Tom was a faculty member and then served as Vice Provost. At the University of Iowa, he is recognized for his leadership, contributing to substantial increases in the 4-year graduation rate and substantial decreases in alcohol behaviors among undergraduates. He serves as Vice President of the Board of the Iowa City Public Library and Vice Chair of the University of Iowa Senior College Committee. He also volunteers for Iowa City Hospice and Table to Table. Who's here? Barbara McFadden recently retired as the Executive Director of the Big Ten Academic Alliance, where she was responsible for a very large-scale projects, such as the 14-member university campuses. From Rutgers to Nebraska, Barb now provides leadership coaching and strategic planning advice for universities and serves as a variety of volunteer and board roles throughout Iowa City. I welcome to our little podium, Barbara and Tom.
Thank you.
Good morning. Well, Amy, that was fantastic. I just have to pause and say, had I heard that 25 years ago, I could have saved myself a lot of time and pain, so thanks. I'll try to be more effective going forward, but that was just really, really fantastic. So Tom and I'll just spend a couple of minutes here and we'll all get going with our day. But we want to remind you that your investment in the United Way, and all of you coordinate investments on behalf of other employees or other groups in the community. Your investment stays here in Johnson and Washington County. And that's an important item to share with those that you'll be influencing during the course of the campaign. The United Way of Johnson and Washington County has a platinum rating from GuideStar. This is one of the very few organizations in the country. I think there are several million nonprofit agencies operating in the United States, and so they get the very highest rating from GuideStar. And only 15% of the total support that we raise goes to manage the headquarters staff. So again, the money that we're bringing in goes directly to helping people in this community, and we're really, really excited about that. And I can assure you that The staff is very high functioning, very well managed, and this is a relief to me as an investor in our community, and it excites me about what we're doing, and I'm very happy to be able to say that.
Right, so Barb and I agreed to serve in this role really without hesitation because United Way is such an important positive force in our community. And it's been a great opportunity to learn more about United Way than I ever knew. Been involved in United Way for years, and of course the first thing you see about United Way is the list of partner agencies, and you go, those are some good agencies. And there's 29 of them, and it seems like from the outside, so United Way funds agencies, great. But what they do with these 29 agencies is a lot more than fund them. First of all, as contributors, we get the benefit of the curation and the vetting that's gone on. These agencies aren't randomly selected from the community. These are good agencies, and that process is done by members of our community, looking at which agencies should United Way support. So that's a benefit we get. We've got 29 agencies that are good agencies that promote healthcare and financial stability and birth through adult education. But there's another layer to this that's really important. United Way serves to coordinate and support these groups in ways that lead to all kinds of synergy. Someone was mentioning to us a great example. When Procter & Gamble has 5 pallets of diapers that they don't need, they call United Way, and United Way gets them to the agencies that can get them to the people who need them. That's a tremendous service. But even beyond the 29 partner agencies, the United Way of Johnson and Washington County staff and the volunteers do important work on top of that. First of all, they run a volunteer clearinghouse. Barb and I have done things like serve at it was an open house or an org fair during the pandemic for people who needed help, and it was going to come from multiple agencies. People in the community who seek help from United Way agencies typically need about 3 agencies to get things done. So we helped check people in there. That was fun. Not nearly as much fun as the time that I got to be Clifford the Big Red Dog for 1 book, 2 book. I mean, that's right there. That's worth the price of admission. So the volunteer clearinghouse is a really important function. And when we have an emergency or disaster in this community, when we have a derecho or a flood, and we need to mobilize people to help, who do we call? We call United Way. United Way puts that together. They're the official agency that's, they're not just like, hey, we'll do it. No, they work all year to be ready to do that. And then there's all kinds of initiatives that you can read about in the annual report, things like their early learning initiative that are just driving change in the community. This community, any community, is better for each of us when it's better for all of us, and that's what United Way makes happen. So it's just a wonderful opportunity that we all have to make our community a better place by supporting United Way.
Thanks, Tom. So what can you do as we leave here today? One, you can share your personal commitment to United Way in an upcoming staff meeting, or even informal ways when you're talking with your friends and neighbors. We hope to have yard signs ready for the campaign a little later in the cycle here, maybe in early September. So you'll be able to put up yard signs in your neighborhood or at your place of business. And remember, this is all about making that big lift together so we can raise the capital that the board and others need to direct activities. So let's aim for 3,300 donors this year. Last year I think we had 3,000. So not a huge ask there, but if we can make it to 3,300 donors for a $2.2 million budget, I think that we would be, well, we'd all be really happy with that, and so would the agencies. But we'll see, maybe we can blast past it. And Trish will let us know throughout the year what are other things that the United Way thinks that we need to add to this campaign. So bringing it in for a landing.
So let me add one more thing that you can do, and you could probably get this done today. So you're leaders in your organizations, and you know lots of leaders in other organizations. Someone who wasn't here today, tell them about it. Tell somebody else what you heard this morning. So let me end by once again thanking our host, Midwest One Bank, and Glenn, thank you very much.
Thank you, this is
Yeah.
beautiful.
Thanking our speaker again. Dang, why did I not know that when I was working?
We have an online MBA program, Tom, that
Yeah.
I'd be happy to talk with you about it.
Okay, good deal. And then thank you all for joining us this morning and for your support for the organization. We're going to leave you with this. Remember, change starts here.